Beneath the gold dome of St. Peter's Basilica lies something far more powerful than most people realize. The Vatican, a spiritual center for over 1 billion Catholics, quietly controls more than 5.6 billion euros in assets and over 5,000 buildings around the world. That's more than some of the largest hotel chains in Europe. And while it preaches humility, its empire stretches from ancient Roman villas to luxury apartments in London's wealthiest districts. Some of that money helps the poor, funds hospitals, supports schools and missions in struggling countries, but not all of it. In 2023, a top cardinal, Angelo Becciu, was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison for using donation money to buy high-end real estate in Chelsea, London. That money came from a fund called Peter's Pence, a collection taken from millions of everyday Catholics. Those who believe their offerings will feed the hungry. But in 2024, internal reports revealed this. Only 10% of Peter's Pence actually reached charity. The rest, gone into risky investments, offshore accounts, and shady business ventures, like a fake green energy deal that burned through 250 million euros. And that's just one part of a much bigger story. Because while the world sees the Vatican as sacred, behind closed doors it operates like a global financial powerhouse. And the deeper you go, the more it begins to look like a Fortune 500 company wearing a robe and a crucifix. This is a story about trust, about money, about power, and what happens when money starts to challenge God. The Vatican is just 0.17 square miles. It's smaller than most shopping malls, and yet its influence spans continents. It has no army, no oil, no exports, and still it commands more wealth, diplomacy, and political power than some entire nations. So how did this happen? How did a faith rooted in poverty, sacrifice, and spiritual devotion become a global financial force? The answer starts centuries ago. It began with land. For most of history, the Catholic Church didn't just own churches. It owned cities, forests, farms. Entire kingdoms paid tribute to Rome. Then came the donations. For generations, people gave money, not just out of faith, but because they were taught it could buy spiritual benefits, forgiveness, salvation, favor in the next life. By the Middle Ages, the Vatican had become one of the largest landowners in Europe. By the Renaissance, it had turned wealth into art, commissioning masterpieces by Michelangelo, Raphael, Bernini. But that was just the beginning. Fast forward to today, and the Vatican still stands as the only religion with its own country. Vatican City is a sovereign state, complete with embassies, diplomatic immunity, and its own bank. It's not just the spiritual headquarters of 1.3 billion Catholics, it's also a tax-free zone with legal protections that shield it from outside scrutiny. And while the outside world sees prayer, ceremony, and stained glass windows, behind the scenes a vast financial network is always at work. Let's talk numbers. The Vatican Bank, officially called the Institute for the Works of Religion, or IOR, manages over 5.6 billion euros in assets. That's more than the GDP of several small countries. The administration of the patrimony of the Apostolic See, known as APSA, controls the Church's real estate portfolio, and it's massive. More than 4,000 properties worldwide, including luxury buildings in Paris, Rome, London, and Geneva. These rentals alone generate around 90 million euros per year. And the total real estate value APSA manages? At least 2.8 billion euros. That's just the known portion. And then there's the art. The Vatican museums are home to some of the most valuable cultural treasures on the planet. The Sistine Chapel ceiling, St. Peter's Basilica, tapestries, sculptures, gold, manuscripts. They bring in over 130 million euros per year from visitors alone. And the collections themselves, so valuable, they're considered priceless. But some estimates place their worth in the tens of billions. All of this, built not through products or innovation, but through centuries of donations, tithes, tribute, and influence. And while some of that wealth supports schools, hospitals, and missions, the full financial web of the Vatican remains deeply hidden, protected by sovereignty, wrapped in tradition, and guarded by a complex system most outsiders never get to see. Because this isn't just a religion, it's a multinational, multi-billion euro empire. And it's only now that the world is starting to ask, where does all that money actually go? For years, the Vatican's wealth was treated like a mystery, a vault no one questioned, a sacred trust protected by tradition. But over time, that trust began to break. One of the first cracks came from a name few outside the church had ever heard: Cardinal Angelo Becciu. Once a rising star inside the Vatican, Becciu held immense power. He controlled funds, oversaw major financial decisions, and reported directly to the Pope. But in 2023, everything changed. He was convicted of embezzlement and fraud linked to one of the church's most embarrassing financial disasters. Here's what happened. Between 2014 and 2018, the Vatican invested nearly 350 million euros to purchase a luxury property in London's Chelsea district. The goal? Turn donations into profit through real estate speculation, but the deal was riddled with corruption. Middlemen took millions in hidden fees, the building was overvalued, and when the Vatican finally sold the property in 2022, it had lost over 140 million euros. Money gone, not from a bad investment strategy, but from inside abuse. Becciu was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison. He became the first cardinal in modern history to be convicted by a Vatican court. And the worst part? The funds used in the deal came directly from Peter's Pence, a charity fund filled by Catholics around the world, many of them poor themselves, believing their donations were feeding the hungry. But Becciu's trial wasn't the only scandal. In 2024, an audit revealed something shocking. Only 10% of Peter's Pence was being used for charitable purposes. The rest, diverted into risky ventures, property deals, and operating expenses for the church's bloated institutions. It gets worse. In one case, the Vatican poured 250 million euros into what was supposed to be a clean energy startup. The company didn't exist. It was a shell, a front. The money vanished into offshore accounts, never to be recovered. And this wasn't just bad luck. Many of these transactions were routed through a labyrinth of holding companies, registered in places like Luxembourg, Malta, and Switzerland, making them nearly impossible to trace. Internal investigators discovered a pattern. Shell firms, secret accounts, paper trails designed to disappear. In private memos, even senior cardinals admitted, "We don't know where half the money is going." Meanwhile, the Vatican's public finances were falling apart. In 2024, the Holy See reported a deficit of 83 million euros, its worst in years. But how, with billions in assets? One reason: the church is spending more than it brings in. Rising salaries, security, a crumbling pension system. In fact, the Vatican's pension fund shortfall has grown to a staggering 631 million euros. That means thousands of priests, nuns, and church workers may not receive the retirement they were promised. And while the Vatican struggles to fund its own future, millions of Catholics still give week after week, believing they're helping the poor. The betrayal here isn't just financial, it's spiritual. People didn't just give money, they gave trust, and that trust was broken. Because these aren't just accounting errors, they're signs of a system that grew too powerful, too complex, and too comfortable operating in the shadows. The cracks are no longer rumors, they're real, and they're widening. By the time the scandals reached the headlines, Pope Francis had already seen enough. He knew the Vatican was in trouble, not just financially, but morally. Too much secrecy, too much power concentrated in the wrong hands, too many donations being misused, while the faithful were being told to sacrifice. And so, he acted. His first major move? He stripped the Secretariat of State, once the most powerful office in the Vatican, of its authority to manage investments. This was the same office tied to the Becciu scandal and the disastrous London real estate deal. In its place, Francis centralized control under the Vatican Bank, YNOR, and the APSA, which oversees the Vatican's property and assets. The goal was simple: fewer hands, more transparency, and better oversight. Next, he replaced key officials with independent financial experts. Some were lay people, others were international auditors. He ordered full internal audits, published annual financial reports for the first time in Vatican history, and launched investigations into high-risk accounts, many of which had existed for decades without oversight. For the first time, the Vatican's financial practices began to resemble those of a modern institution, and the international community noticed. In 2022, the European watchdog group Moneyval, which monitors anti-money laundering compliance, gave the Vatican one of its best ratings ever. It was a rare moment of validation in an otherwise chaotic reform journey. But progress didn't come easy. Behind the scenes, there was fierce resistance. Some insiders deleted records just days before audits were scheduled to begin. Others blocked investigations by quietly rerouting accounts or stalling communication. In private, Francis expressed frustration. "We cannot clean the house if the house keeps hiding the dirt." He was trying to fix a system that had been left untouched for centuries, a machine built on loyalty, silence, and power. And despite being the Pope, he wasn't immune. He faced internal pressure, whispers from cardinals, and fierce backlash from those who saw transparency as a threat. It wasn't just a spiritual battle, it was a war for control. Then, in 2025, Pope Francis died. The world mourned. He was remembered as a man of humility, a pope of the people, a voice for the poor. But in the eyes of man, his greatest mission, financial reform, remained unfinished. Some called him a hero, others a tragic figure, one who tried to bring light into a dark room but was never allowed to find the switch. And so the question was left hanging. Would his reforms die with him? Or would someone else have the courage to continue what he started? When Pope Francis died in 2025, the Vatican stood at a crossroads. One road pointed toward silence, the other toward truth. The world waited, and then the white smoke rose. Pope Leo XIV had been chosen. He is young by papal standards, sharp, outspoken, and unafraid to speak hard truths. From the very beginning, Leo made it clear he wasn't here to maintain tradition. He was here to finish what Francis started. In his first weeks as Pope, Leo commissioned a full audit of Vatican financial records, digging deeper than anyone before him. The results? 1.2 billion euros in hidden assets, money that had never been disclosed, buried in unregistered portfolios, tied to properties no one had accounted for, connected to shell companies in places like Luxembourg and Malta. It wasn't just an oversight, it was systemic concealment. Leo took the findings public. He didn't bury the report. He didn't sugarcoat the damage. He stood before the world and said, the church cannot preach truth while hiding its own. He called for outside auditors, independent financial investigators from Switzerland and the UK. He promised to release financial reports annually, to shut down accounts without purpose, and to build a system where no one, not even a cardinal, was above review. But even as he pushed forward, the resistance grew louder. Behind closed doors, a name began to circulate. The Vatican Deep State, a quiet alliance of senior officials, cardinals, and long-serving insiders determined to protect the old ways. They didn't speak out publicly, but they pulled levers in silence. Some stalled reforms, others blocked investigations. Files disappeared again, and rumors spread that Leo's boldness was making enemies, powerful ones. Inside the Vatican, loyalty runs deep, and not everyone wants change. To some, transparency is betrayal. To others, it's a threat to the very foundations of the church. Leo now stood at a moral fork in the road. Does he continue to shine light into every corner, knowing that doing so could collapse the system? Or does he slow down, protect the legacy, and risk becoming part of the machine he was called to dismantle? Outside the Vatican, Catholics are watching. Some cheer him on, others whisper, he'll never win. But the truth is clear. This is more than a cleanup. It's a battle for the soul of the church. And Pope Leo knows it, because when you step into an empire built on secrecy, even telling the truth can feel like an act of rebellion. The Vatican has always claimed that wealth, when used ethically, can serve God. That money is a tool, that it can build hospitals, feed the poor, educate children, and protect the vulnerable. And in many ways it has. But over the years, that purpose has blurred. The same institutions that preach simplicity also manage multi-billion euro portfolios. The same church that asked for sacrifice has spent hundreds of millions on failed real estate deals. The same system that claims to serve the poor is now under fire for hiding assets, laundering funds, and losing trust. And here's the tension. Can wealth serve God, or does it eventually replace him? It's not a new question. Even in the Bible, there's a moment when Judas criticizes a woman for using expensive oil to anoint Jesus. That money could have gone to the poor, he said. But Jesus replied, the poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. A defense of beauty, of reverence, of spiritual meaning beyond material value. And yet there's a difference between honoring God with sacred art and losing 250 million euros in a fake energy scheme. There's a difference between building a hospital and spending charity funds on a penthouse in London. There's a line. And for many, the church has crossed it because people don't just give money. They give hope. They give trust. And when that trust is broken, it's not just a scandal, it's a wound. The Vatican has promised ethical investing. It has published guidelines like the 2023 document Mensurum Bonum, stressing justice, dignity, and environmental care. But a document isn't a shield. And a promise isn't enough when the numbers say otherwise. Across the world, Catholics are asking hard questions. Why is the church running a deficit with billions in assets? Why are pensions underfunded? While art hangs in gold frames? Why is the truth so hard to find? This isn't about left or right, faith or doubt. It's about transparency, about whether a spiritual empire can survive without sunlight, and about what happens when money starts to challenge God. Because this is bigger than one cardinal or one pope. or one scandal. This is about the soul of a 2,000-year-old institution and whether it can find its way back to the people who gave it power in the first place. So now we ask you, what do you think? Should the Vatican open its books? Should religious institutions be held to the same standards as banks or governments? Or does the church have a right to keep its financial affairs private in service of something greater than money? Tell us in the comments, because this isn't just about one religion. It's about all systems that run on trust, while keeping their ledgers locked away. If this story moved you, challenged you, or opened your eyes, hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell icon. Until next time.